The rain drummed against the basement windows with steady persistence. David Walker stood at the foot of the wooden stairs, surveying the cluttered storage room that had been calling his name for months. 18 years of marriage had a way of accumulating debris, boxes of Christmas decorations, outgrown clothes, and memories packed away in cardboard containers. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Rachel was upstairs somewhere, probably on another marathon phone call with her sister Linda. The conversations had become more frequent lately, always ending abruptly when he entered the room. Emma was at volleyball practice, and Jake was buried in his room with video games. Saturday afternoons like this used to feel peaceful. Now they felt hollow. David had been telling himself for months that the distance between him and Rachel was normal. 18 years of marriage, 2 teenagers, his long hours at Walker Shipping Solutions. Of course, the romance had settled into routine. Of course, she seemed distracted, preoccupied. That's what happened when you built a life together. But as he moved boxes and swept away cobwebs, David couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Rachel's late-night phone calls, her new interest in yoga classes that somehow never left her more relaxed. The way she startled when he entered a room unexpectedly, quickly closing her laptop or sliding her phone face down. He was lifting a box of Rachel's old college textbooks when he noticed it. A slim leather journal wedged behind the container, pressed against the concrete wall like it was hiding. David almost left it there. Privacy was important in a marriage. He trusted Rachel completely, but something about the way it was hidden, deliberately concealed rather than simply forgotten, made him pause. He pulled the journal free, noting how the leather was worn smooth, obviously handled frequently. This wasn't some college relic. The binding was supple, the pages crisp. David opened to the first entry, dated 3 years ago. Rachel's familiar. Handwriting filled the pages with observations about their daily life. Emma's drama with friends, Jake's struggles in algebra, complaints about the grocery budget, normal mom concerns. David smiled, feeling guilty for his suspicion. But as he flipped deeper, the tone shifted. Entries about meeting someone interesting at Starbucks, references to afternoon adventures during hours when David thought Rachel was running errands. His heart began to pound. March 15th. Coffee with Em again today. David's working late all week, perfect timing. Em has this way of making me feel like I'm 25 again. We talked for 3 hours, talked for 2 hours. David's hands began to shake. He forced himself to keep reading, even as his stomach clenched. The entries became more explicit, more detailed. Rachel documented lies she'd told him, alibis she'd crafted. She wrote about hotel rooms, stolen afternoons, the thrill of deception. April 3rd. Close call when David came home early, but I'd already showered and changed. He's so trusting. Never questions anything. Sometimes I wonder if he'd notice if I disappeared for a week. The casual cruelty hit him like a physical blow. David sat heavily on an overturned box, the journal trembling in his grip. He read about Kevin, then Tony, then references to a young guy from the gym, at least 3 different men, maybe more. Each entry revealed a stranger wearing his wife's face. The Rachel in these pages was calculating, unfaithful, and contemptuous of David's trust. She wrote about their marriage like it was a convenient cover story about David himself, like he was a useful but oblivious prop. David pulled out his phone and began taking pictures of key pages. Evidence. He photographed dates and details, forcing himself to remain methodical even as his world crumbled. The last entry he read stopped his heart completely. June 22nd. Relieved the timing worked out after that scare with T. David never questions anything about the kids' schedules, their friends, nothing. Sometimes I think about how different things might have been if that pregnancy test had been positive. But timing is everything, right? David stared at those words until they blurred. The timing of what? Pregnancy test? His mind raced through, implications he didn't want to consider. He closed the journal carefully, his hands surprisingly steady now. The basement felt different, not like the foundation of his family home, but like a tomb. Everything he'd believed about his life, his marriage, his family, was potentially built on lies. But suspicion wasn't proof. If David was going to act on what he'd discovered, he needed more than Rachel's own words. He needed facts that would hold up not just in his own mind, but in court. David stood up, slipping the journal back into its hiding place exactly as he'd found it. Upstairs, he could hear Rachel's voice, still talking to someone who may or may not have been her sister. The sound made his skin crawl. He climbed the basement stairs like a man walking toward his execution, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. David became two people overnight. The first David went through the motions of his life. Kissing, Rachel goodbye in the mornings, helping Jake with homework, cheering at Emma's volleyball games. This David smiled at the right moments, laughed at Rachel's stories, and maintained the comfortable rhythm of 18 years of marriage. The second David was a detective. He returned to the basement journal repeatedly over the next week, each reading, revealing new details he'd missed. Rachel had been methodical in her documentation, noting not just what she'd done, but how she'd covered her tracks. David cross-referenced her entries with his work calendar, family photos, and his own memories. The patterns were devastating. Rachel's affair with Kevin had coincided with David's 3-day business trip to Portland. Her meetings with Tony always happened on Wednesday afternoons when she claimed to be at book club, a book club that David now realized she'd invented entirely. The young guy from the gym encounters aligned perfectly with her Tuesday and Thursday workout schedule. But the most crushing discovery came when David began mapping Rachel's documented infidelities against a different calendar entirely. He pulled out Emma and Jake's baby books and began calculating conception dates. Emma had been born on September 12, 2008. Counting backwards put her conception around mid-December 2007. David flipped through the journal entries, his heart hammering, as he found entries from that period. Multiple encounters with Kevin in December 2007, during a week when David had been traveling for work. Jake's birth date painted an even clearer picture. Born April 3, 2010, his conception would have been around early July 2009. The journal entries from that period documented a particularly intense affair with Tony. David remembered that time distinctly because he'd been working 60-hour weeks to secure an account. The math was brutal and precise. Both of his children had been conceived during periods when Rachel was actively cheating on him. David sat in his office after everyone had gone to bed, staring at printouts of conception calculators and journal photocopies. The children he'd loved unconditionally, sacrificed for, been proud of. They might not be his biological offspring. Every little league game, every scraped knee he'd bandaged, every proud moment when they'd inherited his supposed talents, all of it might have been an elaborate delusion, but David was nothing if not thorough. Suspicion wasn't certainty, and he needed facts before he could act. He researched DNA testing companies with the same methodical approach he used for shipping. Contracts, reading reviews, and comparing accuracy rates. He selected 2 different companies to ensure reliability, ordering test kits under a fake name and having them delivered to his office. Collecting samples required precision and acting skills David didn't know he possessed. Emma's hairbrush yielded several strands with intact roots. Jake's drinking glass provided saliva samples. Hair from their pillowcases offered backup material. David packaged everything according to lab instructions, sent samples to separate facilities, and waited. The hardest part wasn't the waiting, it was maintaining normal family interactions while his heart was breaking in real time. Dinner conversations became minefields. When Emma laughed at one of his jokes, David had to excuse himself to compose himself. When Jake asked for help with the science project about genetics, David nearly broke down entirely. "Dad, why do some kids look exactly like their parents and others don't?" Jake asked innocently, spreading textbooks across the kitchen table. "Well," David managed, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "Genetics are complicated, Sometimes, traits skip generations or combine in unexpected ways. "But you know what really matters about family?" he asked his son. "What?" Jake replied, looking up from his textbook. "Love. Commitment. Being there for each other no matter what," David continued, reaching over to ruffle Jake's hair. "Biology is just science. Family is about choice." Jake nodded seriously, returning to his homework while David excused himself to get air outside. Meanwhile, Rachel continued her routine with no apparent awareness of David's discovery. She still took her mysterious phone calls, still disappeared, for hours at a time with vague explanations. David began documenting these absences, noting when she left, when she returned, and what stories she told. He also started paying attention to her phone habits with new eyes. She'd always been protective of her device, but now David noticed how she angled it away from him, how she took it into the bathroom, how she slept with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand. One evening, while Rachel was in the shower, David noticed she'd left her phone on the kitchen counter. His finger hovered over the home button for a full minute before his conscience won out. He wasn't ready to become someone who violated privacy without absolute certainty. The journal was evidence he'd stumbled upon. Actively hacking her phone would make him the aggressor. But David did start paying attention to the name that appeared most frequently on her screen. Linda called and texted constantly. Except David had spoken with Rachel's actual sister Linda the previous week during a family call, and Linda had mentioned how she and Rachel barely talked anymore due to their busy schedules. The DNA test results were scheduled to arrive in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to maintain his performance as the oblivious husband. 3 weeks to prepare for whatever truth was coming. 3 weeks to figure out how to protect his relationship with Emma and Jake, regardless of what the science revealed. Because that was the terrible irony David was discovering. Biology might determine paternity, but it couldn't erase 16 and 14 years of fatherhood. These children were his in every way that mattered, and he'd be damned if Rachel's betrayal would cost him the most important relationships in his life. He just had to make sure that when the truth came out, Rachel would be the villain of the story, not him. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning in 2 separate manila envelopes, delivered to David's office while Rachel was supposedly at her yoga class. David had prepared for this moment for 3 weeks, but his hands still trembled as he opened the first envelope. Emma, 0% probability of paternal relationship. The second envelope confirmed what David already knew in his heart. Jake, 0% probability of paternal relationship. David allowed himself exactly 1 hour to grieve. He locked his office door, put his head in his hands, and let 18 years of lies wash over him. The children he'd taught to ride bikes, whose scraped knees he'd bandaged, whose report cards he'd celebrated, none of them carried his DNA. Every proud moment when someone commented on how Jake had his determination or how Emma had inherited. His work ethic had been based on fundamental deception. But after that hour, David Walker, regional manager and strategic problem solver, took control. He called his attorney first. Mitchell Brennan had handled the incorporation of David's shipping business and came highly recommended for family law. Over coffee at a neutral location, Mitchell explained David's options. Since your name is on both birth certificates and you've been the primary provider for their entire lives, you're the legal father regardless of biology, Mitchell said, spreading documents across the cafe table. But custody battles can get complicated when infidelity is involved. We need to prove not just that Rachel cheated, but that she's unfit as a parent. What constitutes unfitness? David asked. Ongoing deception, emotional manipulation, putting the children at risk through her behavior. Do you have evidence of her current activities? Mitchell replied. David slid copies of the journal, entries across the table. Mitchell read them with the detached interest of a professional, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. This is good, Mitchell said finally. Documented pattern of deception, multiple affairs, cavalier attitude toward the marriage, and children. But these entries are from several years ago. We need current evidence. David had anticipated this. For the past month, he'd been documenting Rachel's lies. Her claim to be at book club when no such club existed. Her yoga classes at times when the studio was closed. Her elaborate stories about helping friends when those friends were out of town. "I need to catch her in something current and undeniable," David said. "Carefully," Mitchell warned. "Nothing illegal, nothing that could be construed as harassment. Just document inconsistencies and let her own lies build the case." The second part of David's strategy involved protecting his assets. His accountant, Janet, helped him understand their financial picture without triggering Rachel's suspicion. Their joint accounts, the house, his business equity, everything was currently vulnerable to division. "Start moving money gradually," Janet advised. "Not hiding it, just consolidating it in accounts where you have better oversight. Document all your contributions to the children's education, healthcare activities. Build a paper trail showing you've been the primary financial provider." The most crucial element of David's plan involved the children themselves. He needed to strengthen their bond without revealing the truth prematurely, and he needed to help them understand that whatever came next wasn't his fault. David began, scheduling individual time with Emma and Jake. Coffee dates with Emma before school, where she talked about college plans and future dreams. Saturday morning hikes with Jake, where they discussed everything from sports to philosophy. During these conversations, David carefully guided discussions toward values, honesty, loyalty, the importance of trust in families. "Dad, what would you do if someone you loved lied to you about something really important?" Emma asked one morning, stirring her latte at their favorite cafe. David studied his daughter's face, wondering if she already sensed something was wrong. "I'd want to know the truth, even if it hurt," he answered. "Lies always cause more damage than honesty, even painful honesty." "What if the truth meant everything would change?" she asked. "Then everything was already built on a lie, and it was going to change eventually anyway," he replied. "Better to face reality and build something authentic than live in a beautiful fantasy." Emma nodded thoughtfully, and David wondered how much she'd already figured out about her mother. His conversations with Jake took a different tone, but covered similar ground. During a hike through Forest Park, Jake brought up a situation with friends where someone had been caught lying. "The thing is, Dad, once you know someone's been lying to you, you start questioning everything they've ever said. It's like the trust just disappears," Jake said. "That's why honesty is so important," David agreed. "Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy." "Do you and Mom ever lie to each other?" Jake asked. David stopped walking, choosing his words carefully. "I've never lied to your mother about anything important, and I hope she's never lied to me," he said. "But Jake, if you ever found out that someone, anyone, had been lying to you about fundamental things, would you want to know?" "Absolutely," Jake replied firmly. "I'd rather have an ugly truth than a pretty lie any day." David squeezed his son's shoulder, storing that conviction away for when he'd need it. Throughout this preparation, Rachel remained oblivious to David's discoveries. She maintained her routine of deception with the confidence of someone who'd never been caught. Her phone calls continued, her mysterious absences persisted, and her performances as the devoted wife and mother never wavered. But David was building toward a confrontation that would expose everything at once. He'd learned from studying Rachel's own methods, the power of documentation, the importance of timing, the devastating effect of incontrovertible evidence. The final piece of his strategy involved choosing the perfect moment to spring his trap. It needed to be when the children were present, but not the primary focus. They needed to witness their mother's lies firsthand, see her panic and desperation when confronted with undeniable truth. Only then would they understand that David's revelation wasn't what destroyed their family. Rachel's lies were. David set the date for the following Friday evening. Rachel had already mentioned plans to meet Linda for dinner, despite the real Linda being out of town visiting their mother. It would be the perfect setup. A lie David could immediately disprove, creating the opening he needed to reveal everything else. As he finalized his plans, David felt something he hadn't experienced. In months, control. For too long, he'd been a passive participant in his own life, unknowingly playing a role in Rachel's elaborate deception. But now he held all the cards, all the evidence, all the power. Rachel Walker was about to discover that her victim was actually a strategist, and her house of lies was about to collapse around her. Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. David had orchestrated every detail. Emma and Jake were home from school, positioned in the living room with homework spread across the coffee table, close enough to overhear but not obviously eavesdropping. David had prepared the kitchen table like a war room, copies of journal entries in manila folders, DNA test results in sealed envelopes, and a small digital recorder he'd purchased that morning. Rachel arrived home an hour later, then promised, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled despite the cool evening. She breezed through the front door with the practiced confidence of someone whose lies had never been challenged. "Sorry I'm late," she called out, hanging her purse on the hook by the door. "Linda's going through a rough time with her divorce, and you know how she gets. We lost track of time at dinner." David watched from the kitchen doorway as Rachel smoothed her hair and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Such a small gesture, but it spoke to her vanity, her need to maintain appearances even in the safety of her own home. "Rachel," David said, his voice carrying none of the warmth she was used to. "I need you to join me at the table." Something in his tone made her pause. She turned toward him, her expression shifting from casual dismissal to cautious attention. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Come sit down," he answered. Rachel approached the kitchen slowly, her eyes taking in the folders and documents arranged on the table. David had positioned himself strategically, his back to the living room so the children could see Rachel's face, but not his own. "What's all this?" Rachel asked, settling into her chair with forced casualness. David reached across the table and placed the leather journal directly in front of her. Rachel's face went completely white. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" David asked quietly. "I don't... What is that?" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "You tell me," he replied. "I found it in the basement storage room, hidden behind your college textbooks." Rachel stared at the journal like it was venomous. Her hands trembled as she reached toward it, then pulled back. "David, I can explain," she began. "I'm listening," he said. From the living room came the sound of homework being abandoned as Emma and Jake became aware something serious was happening. It's complicated," Rachel began, her voice gaining strength as she slipped into survival mode. "That journal, it's not real. I mean, it's real, but the things in it are fiction. I was working through some fantasies, some thoughts about what life might be like if things were different." David nodded as if considering this explanation. Then he opened the first manila folder and began reading directly from photocopied pages. March 15th. "Coffee with M again today. David's working late all week. Perfect timing." David's voice remained steady and conversational. "That was during my Portland trip, wasn't it? You told me you spent that evening reorganizing Emma's closet." Rachel's breathing became rapid and shallow. "Those are just stories, David. Creative writing exercises," she insisted. April 3rd. Close call when David came home early, but I'd already showered and changed. "He's so trusting, never questions anything," David continued, flipping to another page. "That was the day you claimed to have food poisoning, remember?" "You're taking this out of context," she protested. David opened the second folder and produced the DNA test results. The papers hit the table with the finality of a judge's gavel. Rachel's composure shattered completely. She lunged for the documents, but David held them out of reach. "Test errors," she gasped. "Those tests are wrong all the time." "Two different labs, Rachel. Two separate tests. Emma and Jake share none of my DNA," he stated firmly. The words hung in the kitchen air like a death sentence. From the living room came the sound of chairs scraping against hardwood floors. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway first, her face stricken with confusion and growing horror. "What DNA tests?" Emma demanded. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Jake crowded behind his sister, his frame tense with alertness. Rachel tried to recover, switching tactics to damage control. "Kids, your father is upset about some old journal entries that don't mean anything. He's blowing everything out of proportion," she explained desperately. "Is it true?" Emma's voice cut through her mother's explanation like a blade. "Have you been cheating on Dad?" "Emma, sweetheart, it's complicated. Adults sometimes," Rachel began. "Just answer the question," Jake shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Have you been lying to us?" Rachel looked around the kitchen like a trapped animal. David remained silent, letting her dig her own grave. "Those journal entries are old," Rachel finally said. "Whatever happened in the past doesn't change how much I love this family." "What? About the DNA tests?" Emma pressed. "Are you saying Dad isn't our biological father?" Rachel's silence was answer enough. Emma's face crumpled and Jake let out profanity that would have earned punishment under normal circumstances. "You destroyed our family," Emma said, her voice thick with tears and disgust. "You lied to everyone about everything." Jake was beyond words, his face red with rage as he stared at his mother. When Rachel tried to approach him, he physically recoiled from her touch. "Don't," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't touch me," David finally spoke, his words measured and calm in contrast to the chaos Rachel had created. "I want you to pack your things and move to the guest room tonight. We'll discuss the divorce arrangements once you've found somewhere permanent to live," he said. "David, please," Rachel begged, tears streaming down her face. "We can work through this. The kids need their mother." Emma looked at her with pure contempt. "I don't need someone who's been lying to me my entire life," she replied coldly. "I don't need someone who humiliated Dad while he was working to support us." Jake nodded in fierce agreement. "He's our real dad," he declared. "Biology doesn't matter. He's the one who raised us." Both children moved toward David, forming an unconscious protective barrier between him and Rachel. Rachel tried once more, to salvage something from the wreckage. "I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you kids. I'm still your mother," she pleaded. "You're the woman who gave birth to us," Emma corrected. "But Dad is our real parent." As Rachel retreated upstairs to pack, Emma and Jake flanked David at the kitchen table, both reaching for him in the same moment. Their hug was fierce, desperate, and healing. "We choose you," Emma whispered. "Biology doesn't matter. You're our real dad." Jake nodded against David's shoulder. "She's the one who broke everything, not you," he said firmly. 6 months later, David Walker stood in his kitchen making Saturday morning pancakes, a ritual that had taken on new significance since becoming a single father. Emma set the table while Jake squeezed fresh orange juice, their movements synchronized by months of practice. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Rachel's documented infidelity, combined with Emma and Jake's sworn testimony about her deception and their preference to live with David, left her with minimal assets and no custody. Rights, the house, remained theirs, along with most of the savings David had accumulated over 18 years of hard work. Rachel's new reality had become something of a local scandal. After losing the house and her family, she'd been forced to move back, in with her elderly parents, a humiliating regression from suburban wife and mother to middle-aged dependent daughter. Her attempts to contact the children had become increasingly desperate and inappropriate, leading to a no-contact order that Emma and Jake had requested themselves. The professional changes in David's life had been equally dramatic. His renewed focus and energy had led to a promotion to regional manager. His colleagues, who'd learned about the situation, had been uniformly supportive. David's relationship with Emma and Jake had evolved into something deeper than traditional father-child dynamics. They'd become a team, united by shared trauma and mutual respect. Emma had grown more mature, taking on household responsibilities without being asked. Jake had channeled his anger into academic achievement and sports. The journal that had started. Everything now lived in David's safe, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Rachel's attempts to rebuild her life had been spectacularly unsuccessful. Her former friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the drama and unwilling to take sides in such a clear-cut case of betrayal. Rachel blamed David for turning the children against her and destroying the family with his vindictive behavior. This deflection would have infuriated him months ago, but now it simply confirmed what he'd always suspected. Rachel was fundamentally incapable of accepting responsibility for her actions. On quiet mornings like this Saturday, David sometimes reflected on the strange gift Rachel's betrayal had given him. Without her lies forcing the truth into the open, he might have spent years unconsciously supporting her deception. Most importantly, he might never have discovered that his love for his children transcended biology in ways that made their bond stronger, not weaker. Emma pulled him from his thoughts by stealing a piece of bacon from the serving plate. "Dad, Sarah's mom wants to know if you'd like to come to their dinner party next weekend," she said casually. David raised an eyebrow. Sarah's mom was recently divorced herself and had been finding excuses to chat with David at school events. "Are you trying to set me up?" he asked with mock suspicion. "Maybe," Emma admitted with a grin. "You deserve to be happy." Jake nodded sagely. "Plus, she makes really good cookies," he added. David laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. His children wanted him to find happiness. They felt secure enough in their relationship with him to encourage new connections. Rachel's betrayal, which had once threatened to destroy everything he valued, had actually strengthened the bonds that truly mattered. The truth had set them all free, from lies, from false obligations, from the exhausting pretense of a marriage built on deception. Rachel Walker had lost everything that mattered because she'd never understood its value in the first place. David Walker had gained something precious, the absolute certainty that real family bonds transcend biology, that love earned through presence and commitment is unbreakable, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply allowing someone to face the full consequences of their own choices. He flipped another pancake and smiled at his children, his real children, the ones who'd chosen him as much as he'd chosen them. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.